getting worse.
Right.
We need to do something about it.
Right. Absolutely. I know for me, going back to the symbolic ground was so powerful. In a sense, you know, going back to a place where I was so vulnerable and taking my power back, you know, going back to that place and saying, okay, I'm taking my life back now. You're not going to take anything from me. I'm not going to be triggered by this anymore, you know, and it was just you know, and as far as the pictures, I really just kind of sat in the space and felt my feelings, and she just snapped the photos as they come, and it was overwhelming. I didn't think I was going to cry. I thought I was going to be numb. And, you know, I did. I started crying, and I just kind of let those feelings process, and that was really healing too, and taking that power back too. Like, it's okay to feel these feelings, but look at me, get up, stand up, and now, and move forward, and let other people know, you know, men and women, that you can move forward. It doesn't have to be something that debilitates you forever. You don't have to even be triggered by this forever.
How did you two connect?
So Jenée and I, we met at AV Tech College like years ago. And we were friends, and we hung out for about a year, and then we reconnected through social media.
Yeah.
So thank you, Facebook. And I found her, and her name, I'm like, Jenée. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Jenée. And you can't forget a name like that. I mean, I always loved her name and the meaning of her name. I love that it means the breath of God. I mean, I think that is just powerful. And she's such a compassionate, spiritual person. I remembered that about her. So after seeing her post come, out about her story, I just was drawn to her and to reconnect. And then when this project came, she kept liking my post for Mindful Evolution, and I thought, well, maybe I should reach out to her. Maybe she'd want to be a part. And yay, she did.
The day that we went to snap the photos, I like flaked out like 3 times. I kept trying to change the time, and finally I stopped and I prayed about it. Because I remember even texting Lauren, like, I don't know if I can do this. And I stopped and prayed about it, and I said, you know what, though? This is not about me. It's not just about me. This is for other people. And once I took myself out of the equation, it really gave me the strength to do it. But Emily, I remember when I relapsed last year, and I put, a post that I wanted to end my life on Facebook, and she commented and messaged me and reached out to me, and she had remembered me from years ago in class. And that really struck something with me, that I, was remembered by someone years ago, and a strength that you saw even years ago. And I held on to those comments from that post all through treatment. I went back and read it, and like, you are a huge source of encouragement for me. So
thank
that
you.
meant a lot. Yeah, we're already gonna cry.
There's a box of tissues underneath this table.
We might need one.
Can you talk a little bit about, if you can take yourself back to the moment when she pitched the idea to you to go back to this place and tell this story through the art of photography? What was your initial reaction, and like, what kind of emotions and feelings were going through you at the time? You're approaching your 1 year anniversary in recovery at the time. You were kind of building on some serious momentum, some serious spiritual growth and relational growth as a mother, as a girlfriend. Like, what was your initial emotional response to the invitation that Emily threw out to you?
I was on board with it immediately. I felt God pull me to it almost immediately, and then after that there was a little fear and hesitation, because I was like, this is going to be a big step. This is, because I have so many people in my life that are doing these big, amazing things, and I was kind of wondering, Like, when's my thing going to come? And so when she messaged me, I was like, okay, God's bringing me a thing, so I should do this thing. It's something I'm really passionate about also, you know, and it's something that, you know, with the lived experience that I can actually help someone else with. And that gives me joy and gives me hope to be able to help other people, you know, to know that these experiences were not in vain, you know. So I kind of feel like it was a God's will thing, and I had to step up and be brave. So.
And you did.
And I did.
The pictures came out amazing.
Yes, they're awesome.
She's an amazing photographer. Yeah, they're beautiful.
Did you have a photography background before starting this project?
No. Actually, I've been told from my mom for years, like, that I should be a photographer. And I've worked with photographers, and I can capture shots. I don't know what it is. I've never taken any classes. I just think I have a creative eye. And I actually told Jenée that for my birthday, I think I'm going to ask for a camera instead of a puppy. Because the camera, I think I'm going to start my own photography business with this project. I really do.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll still work with photographers. That's not changing. But, you know.
Yeah.
So it kind of
awesome.
opened up your kind of creative outlet.
There you go.
Starting this project has.
Definitely.
In a sense. Let's go back to that day when you went out and took the photos. Because the concept or idea is to kind of tell the story of what happened and talk about the growth and healing that you've gone through over the last couple years. That specific experience most likely contributed to many of the behaviors and things that you went through. What was it like going out there that day and taking those photos?
Oh, man. When we first walked out there, you know, at the time, it was during active addiction. I was homeless, or a person experiencing homelessness.
For all our PCers out there.
Yeah, and using as well. And so it kind of was a blur that night, all the events. But when I went back, there was some clarity. So there was definitely some overwhelming emotions associated with that, just seeing the thorn bushes, the briars, you know, realizing the brutality of it, you know.
What happened out there originally?
Originally, I was, like I said, experiencing homelessness. I was walking down the street with my significant other, and we were attacked by 3 or 4 men. I'm not sure to this day. I know who one of them is, not really sure about the others. They broke her leg, bashed her head in, they threw her somewhere, and they dragged me up into the woods. And I just remember being in the thorn bushes, on my hands and knees and not being able to get up and screaming for help. I never felt so helpless in my life. That was probably the moment where I was like, I could die here and nobody would know, you know? And at the time, the kind of person I was, I really felt like nobody would care either. It was terrifying. And I was knocked back out, and I came to in jail. Actually, I was picked up by a cop, and they let me sleep there that night.
Not under arrest?
No, not under arrest. They somehow, after the event, I had wandered onto Charlotte Street by myself, and they found me in the middle of the road, just laying in the middle of the road. And I remember walking back out of jail, and there was no, you know, that's what I love about the peer support, because there really wasn't anybody to step in. No one really knew about the trauma. You know, law enforcement, they didn't really know what to do. They just kind of let me sleep and shower there and then let me go.
Was there a report filed with them?
There was not.
Surrounding the case?
There was not. I went to the hospital a few hours later to confirm what had happened, because even, you know, I was confused as well about what happened until they confirmed. Of course, when I woke up and took a shower, I knew. Yeah, and I think I never filed a report because I never, for one, I didn't know for sure. It was all such a blur. For two, there was so much shame. I was so ashamed. I was afraid, you know, and like I said, that's what I love about peer support is I'm hoping
She was trying to get
people can come into those situations and be an advocate for that person that doesn't have a voice in those situations, because I was just, you know, walked right back out of jail with no shoes. And I'll never forget, though, this lady. And I didn't even know her name. And she was visiting someone in jail, and she walked up to me before she walked in, and she said, "God is telling me to help you." And I said, "Well, I'd really like a pair of shoes." So she took me to Walmart, and she bought me a pair of shoes. And I'll never forget that kindness, you know. So I, even in situations like that, those were those little moments where I knew that something bigger was watching over me and protecting me, you know, even in the hardest times.
After this event, how much time passed before you began to kind of look at what might have happened and like kind of began to address some of that trauma?
Well, I still continued to use for quite a few months, and I ended up moving to another city, and things got pretty bad there, and came back home. I had to leave the relationship that I was in. It got very domestically violent as well, and I just got on a bus and came back home, back to the same area that I was homeless in by myself. And through a series of events, what's so amazing is one of the first people that I had a drink with but also found recovery a few years before I did. And I had seen her when I was staying at a halfway house at one point before I experienced homelessness. And she had been reaching out to me over the course of that year. And I reached out to her finally, and I was like, I'm done with this lifestyle. And she let me live at her house for a few months, and that was around when I started to kind of process. I was pretty numb. At first. I didn't know what to think or feel about all that I had experienced, you know. Yeah. It was kind of like, did that really happen? You know, did I really do that? Was that really done to me? You know, it's still, sometimes it's still hard to process, you know. That's why it's a lifelong journey of healing, you know.
It most certainly is. We talk a lot about the process of forgiveness and like self-forgiveness and that sort of thing, and recognizing that it's not like a fixed destination or a permanent place, a place that you achieve, but it's also fleeting, and you can forgive yourself today as best as you can right now in this moment, and tomorrow some of that guilt and shame may reappear.
Right.
And it's about turning towards it and going back to that process of forgiveness. The day you walked out there with Emily, what was going through your mind?
There was a lot of emotions.
Yeah.
A lot of emotions.
I remember one thing you said, and I when I spoke in Philly, I kind of did a little background story with your pictures, and you were there, and you were there, and we were both in the thorns, and you said this is where it happened, and you stopped, and that's when you started to cry, and I just like seriously just as a survivor, I could connect with you, even though my story isn't like yours. But I just started crying too. And I remember you said, it's worse than I thought. People didn't believe me. People said it wasn't that bad. That was, I won't forget that, because that people need to hear that.
Yeah.
And that is a reason I think that capturing that symbolic ground is important, because you can tell your story, but taking someone back there through photography and saying like, this is what led to my rape, or this is what led to, when I OD'd and when I went to rehab. There's so many different areas that symbolic ground could be. That this is where I tried to commit suicide. It's connected, and if we can show like this is important because this led to that, and I need to go back here because I need to show that symbolic ground that it doesn't have me anymore. It doesn't have control.
I think also, as a survivor, and many people, because a lot of us, especially in our childhood, even like, I know a lot of people that things happened to them in their childhood, and they didn't want to talk about it, or when they told someone that they didn't believe them, so we minimize the trauma, that comment. I guess I didn't know it was that bad because, we try to minimize that, and that can actually stunt the healing, and going back there and facing it was like, okay, this was bad, but it was also empowering because like I conquered that, I got through that. Yes. And that's what's so beautiful about this project, is that you can go back to a place like that and say, but here I am now. Here I am now, like a mother of 2 kids and a beautiful relationship, and, getting ready to work in treatment and give back. And that's just like, wow. Like from that animalistic point to a person, like I'm a person now. And I have these things that, I can contribute to society. And I think that's so important for survivors everywhere to know that. Take that and take your power back. And I don't know, it's came full circle for me.
Well, certainly. I think that, the way that we are hardwired and our way that our mind works is to immediately turn away from and avoid that pain. And that environment that you're describing is a point or a place of significant pain. So it's only natural for you to avoid it or suppress it or not acknowledge it. But when you show up in the form that you guys did, it creates a doorway, a pathway to healing that you might not have known you were capable of, right? Like the last year, I'm sure a large part of your recovery has been healing from some of these traumatic experiences, but it's a process. And by going to this place and walking through that pathway is kind of like a catapult of healing. And it's like, though it is so fucking uncomfortable to do, it's just as healing. The healing happens as quickly or even more significantly than you might expect it to. Because I'll tell you, Jenée, like, you've been in this room before. We had conversations off the air about coming on the podcast and sharing some of your story. You were kind of like, when I'm ready, I'll let you know when I'm ready. It was like that, It wasn't like a week after these pictures were posted, and you messaged me and were like, hey, I'm ready. You know, I mean, that's the truth,
That's
right?
the truth. Yeah.
And so, like, I mean, we're good friends, but you know, I don't talk to you on a daily basis. I don't see you on a daily basis, and I've witnessed a significant change in the last 30 days since you've done this. A glow, a different look, a different person. And I think that a lot of it has to do with turning towards this experience and really feeling it, and then sharing it with the world and sharing it with other survivors, that they too can feel that pain with you through this project, and they too can heal and glow in ways that you are currently right now. It's super inspiring. Where the Mindful Evolution Project, can we like take a step back and kind of talk about like the process of getting to that point? And like, I mean, you talked a little bit at the beginning of like the idea and where the name came from, but as you were like, had this idea, like what led up to the idea?
So I'm like a very visual person. Like I'm just visual. I'm always visualizing, kind of like daydreaming, but I'm always just envisioning like bigger things. And, you know, I would love to do a TED Talk. Like that's my goal. It's one of my goals. I'm going to get there. I just don't know when, but as I was just thinking of all the things I wanted to do, it was really after I gave my first talk at RAINN University last April that I truly felt at home. Speaking to those students, telling my story in a creative way that made them, that they were paying attention. I involved them. I had them like, can you hold this? Can you hold this? And they had no idea that they were part of the statistic I was showing. Like, I was on fire. And like my boyfriend, he came with me and he said, babe, you were in your element. You were become a different person, who you were meant to be. And I just got so inspired, and I just started thinking of all these ideas, and I'm like, I want to make change that sticks. You know, there's like enough awareness, and I want to bring awareness, but I want to change these statistics. So I want to do it in a creative way. And Mindful Evolution just kind of evolved. Mindful Evolution. It really did. And it really did. My boyfriend and I, we were late one night talking about, you know, names, because I wasn't sure what it would be. I mean, I had no idea. It just kind of came together. And I think God, of course, he played a role in that for me. I do yoga and I meditate and I have quiet time with God and I freelance write. And I just like totally had this idea of what if we broke it down? I'm like, what if we go back? You know, what if we go back to who we were before the incident, you know, that innocence phase. And then if we go to that symbolic ground of where you were when it happened or where you were when it led to where it happened. And then what if we go to the after effects of how you felt? And then what if we go to when you finally felt free? When you finally you realized that you were the only one who can set yourself free. And you can have the best support groups, you know, the best therapists, all the prayers in the world, but you have to realize like you are the one that has to open up your own prison. You got to open up that door and let yourself out. And when I realized that I had to be that one.
That gave me chills. It's so true.
In one of the photos of my story, Donna Angel, photographer Donna Angel captured, she put me in my cage. And that was her idea. She put me in the cage I was holding. And I was like, whoa, that is like really freaky because that is so true, you know? And so to me, it's just, I thought, let's break it down and let's do it through a story where people would pay attention. Because I think that photos are going to get clicked on more. Photos are going to be like, wow, like that's powerful. And I had someone come to me and message me and say, who I went to school with, and say, these are sad. photos, these numbers, they're depressing. And it was where everyone could see it. And I said, yeah. I said, you're not meant to feel comfortable with these posts. You're meant to feel uncomfortable because nobody wants to talk about it, but we need to. So I'm getting you out of your comfort zone, and you're going to thank me for it because
she's absolutely right. But you know, it is so powerful going through that experience. It really is, you know. And I was thinking when you were talking about the cages, you know, and it's not just that trauma; it's those cages of addiction. You know, the you know, a lot of people, you know, use and maybe not just drugs and alcohol, but other people or food or any type of addictions to cover up something that was wounded within us. You know, even if it was years ago, and it doesn't have to be just sexual trauma. It can be, you know, your parents got a divorce, you moved, you know, trauma is so different across the spectrum from everybody on how we respond. And there really is no comparison of one is worse than the other. It's how does this affect you? What is your cage? You know, and so that picture of the cage is so powerful because I believe anyone can relate to that on any level. And, you know,
and you just said it. That's what this is about, is that we all relate, is that we all have trauma in some form. Everybody could get their photos taken and do this because and just hashtag Mindful Evolution Project. That's all you have to do. Just hashtag that Mindful Evolution Project and take your photos. Totally fine. Just make sure you give it credit, please, so we can just spread it around. But that's what it's about.
Absolutely.
We all are connected. We all have trauma in some form. So,
and it was one of the things we were talking about before the show is that at some point in your life, you'll face an experience that you were ill-equipped to cope with or to meet, right? And that is a layer of trauma. And that the more of those experiences that you have, the more they will affect and kind of shape you and turn you into the person that you become. Right. And so it's about learning how to deal with that in ways like this project or in ways like meditation or whatever it is that will allow you to prosper and thrive and, you know, achieve your full human potential. The thing that I think is so beautiful about this is the artistic element to it and the creative element to it.
Absolutely.
Because those of us who have experienced the suffering caused or created by addiction, those of us who have experienced the suffering that these traumatic experiences create, we tend to lose that artistic element in our life. Whether we think we ever had one or not, I do believe that every person has something within themselves that is creative and artistic in a way, whether it's music and poetry or podcasting and art.
Absolutely.
And so we get so consumed by the addiction. We get so consumed by the sexual trauma, domestic violence, whatever it is, that we literally lose a connection with that. And there's something so powerful in that creative element. So you're empowering these individuals to take that back, right? And to learn what that is. It's awesome. It's amazing. It's such a beautiful thing.
It is. And early recovery, I remember, and I still consider myself in early recovery because we only have one day.
That's right.
We got one day. We got right now, you know.
Oh, no, I see a necklace around your neck that states otherwise, ma'am.
I love this necklace. This is like the nicest thing that I have had in years, you know. And speaking of trauma, actually, through some childhood trauma, I couldn't wear necklaces for, you know, a reason of its own. It was a trigger for me to wear a necklace. So this is kind of symbolic in itself because not only does it represent a year of recovery, and not only was it given to me by someone that I dearly love, but I can wear necklaces now.
Yes. Yes.
So that's just kind of another tiny piece of the story. And then I lost my train of thought on what I was going to say. Oh, in early recovery, I wrote a lot of poetry. And that was a big outlet for me, was writing poetry. And what's funny is I actually wrote a poetry specifically on my feelings about addiction, and I related to a cage. I talked about my demons. I fight to keep caged, but they rattle their bars and the sound clangs in my brain. And then I talk about going back to symbolic ground. Also in the poem, I talk about I went back into Hades to take back what's been stolen. So I just happened to think of those lyrics, and I was like, wow, I'll have to pull up that poem again because, you know, and then in the end, it says, please look at us addicts with grace, because we have looked in the eyes of the devil's face, of the enemy's face, dark angel's face. That's what it is. We've looked in the eyes of the dark angel's face. You know, and that can also apply to anyone. There's, you know, a dark angel in anyone's life. But that cage is a very broad symbol to represent a lot, and that's something that I think a lot of people can relate to. Our own prison, you know.
Definitely.
Creed sings about it.
Yeah.
So
Everybody.
yeah.
How did you get to the point in your life where you were on a stage sharing your story to a student body of college students?
Yeah. So it wasn't until it was probably within the last 4 years that I admitted what happened. That I admitted to myself after trainings. I'm in mental health. I work in mental health, and so when I was in school for my social work degree, I was triggered by a lot. I had to write papers based on my childhood and based on like a biopsychosocial assessment. And the more testimonies I heard through these trainings, and the more I realized, wow, what I repressed. And I realized that what happened to me was what these testimonies, what these people were saying, and that made me need to open up that closet. And it took a while. It took therapy. It took telling, that would get me emotional, telling my best friend, my mom. It took telling her what happened and that it wasn't her fault. And I think that's so important for families to understand, is when their child comes forth with something that happened years ago or even yesterday. Like sometimes, like, you know, you can do everything for your child. You can protect them the best you can, and it can happen. So like to let her know, like, it wasn't her fault, you know. And once I finally told her, which was November of 2017, I was already a speaker for RAINN, Rape, Abuse, Incest, Neglect Network, and I hadn't gotten a speaking opportunity yet. I had applied for a year, nothing. But once I told my mom, it's like the universe opened that door.
Wow.
And I got like opportunities, and then I met Brian Cardoza, survivor, author, artist, and he just connected me to Philly. He connected me to survivor panels in Raleigh, and it was just like, I had to tell her. I had to tell her before I could do it. So that's how I got there, I guess.
Yeah, but
Wow.
you know, that's a pretty bold move to volunteer for an organization like RAINN, right? To volunteer to be a speaker. So like most people, the average person, like, okay, this happened to me. It's time to share the story, and they'll talk to a therapist and their loved ones and the people that are close to them. But to have the courage to like take it a step further and say, this story is so important for me to share that I'm going to volunteer for an organization like RAINN to travel and talk to college students and young people and people who have been affected by this form of abuse, and to share my story, not just in my bubble, but in a very public way.
Yeah.
Right?
And what a wave you've created. I mean, and I truly feel like this is just the beginning. You know, this gave me my voice back. So that's a priceless gift that you've given to me. And
Oh, there's the tissues.
you know, if you hadn't been so bold, you know, this is just, you know, just the beginning. I feel like,
And the other thing that
'cause I'm pretty loud, and we're gonna make moves up out here,
Let's
up
get
in
loud.
here, everywhere. Yes.
the other thing that I learned is that through doing these shows every week is that, only a small percentage of them reach out and let you know how you've impacted them, right?
Yeah.
Thousands of people see your posts, and a very small percentage of them will drop a comment or send you a message.
Right.
There's probably, 90% more than do reach out that actually, that actually received a positive message or inspired them to tell their parents or to talk to somebody about what happened. There's so many more people that actually get the message that just don't come forward and talk to you about it.
Yeah. And I have to remind myself of that because even if it impacts one person, it's worth it,
Well, you just heard that it already
I
has.
was going to say, I know. Right. And, it's just, this is just so important, but it's so uncomfortable. And I completely think you're right. I think people are looking and don't like it because they're too afraid. They're not ready, or, they realize, oh my gosh, that's me, just like I did years ago. And I'm like, wow, I need to go through the process, and so.
Or just the shame,
Yeah.
As far as when it comes to, in addiction, there are so many of us, and I believe there's many more of us that have even spoken up where, maybe it wasn't rape, but we have sold ourselves for drugs. We have, lowered our standards, put a price tag on your body, done things that, with other people or with your dealers or whatever that you wouldn't have done before, and not just women, but men too. And that's like, it can be a fear to speak up because we're so used to, we got to put this guard up, and sharing that's going to make you look weak and vulnerable. But what I found when I started to speak up was strength and power. And it was kind of ironic at first that sharing my most vulnerability is what gave me my strength back. And that's what's so beautiful about the project is the project allowed me to see that, and have that firsthand experience, and I feel like people could be a part of this process, and it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to post your photos on Facebook and tell everybody,
Right.
You can take the photos and that just be a personal experience for you because everyone's recovery journey is different.
Yep.
And some people aren't going to want to, you can be a part of the movement, and it doesn't mean that you have to, you can remain anonymous in that to protect your safety, your security, just, if you need someone to talk to know that you're not alone, we will, protect that as well in confidence, so that's what it's about, you don't necessarily have to post and put it up everywhere and have it go viral. It can be a very personal thing for you as well.
I completely agree. And I'm so glad you said that because you read my mind, because I want anyone watching, if you connect with this, to realize, to know that, it can be your own journey. And if you ever wanted to share that, then you can contact me. But you don't have to. It can totally be no recovery. It's not linear. We know that. So it's totally, everyone has a different process.
And there's no set format. It's
it's
up to the individual to define how they choose to tell their story, whether it's through a photo shoot like Jenée did or through a beautiful poem like you also wrote. It's all about how you choose to share the message of hope and recovery.
For me, I'm the same, like Jenée, when I speak to student bodies or to, other survivors or, just wherever, poetry slams or, there's opportunities everywhere. I get so energized and so empowered. And that is that's my way of healing. Cause for me, sharing is healing. And that for me, the more I share, the more I connect, I heal. And that's not everybody, but that's me. And I think Jenée's the same with that.
Absolutely. We were also kind of brainstorming and thinking about, since I'm being in recovery, I've learned the 12 steps. Mm-hmm. And we were thinking of, in some fellowships, some might consider this an outside issue. So what we were looking at is starting our own support groups for, trauma specifically. It doesn't have to be specifically sexual trauma, but anything that has impacted you in a traumatizing way, and you want a safe place to share that we can offer those groups as well. Yes. People that might be outside the realms of the 12-step fellowship, that may not declare themselves as a person of addiction or have experienced addiction or a person in recovery, but just someone who has experienced trauma to come in and to be able to talk about that in a safe zone. So, yeah.
It's a future project that's coming on the horizon.
Yeah, that's what we're brainstorming
definitely
about. Yeah.
I work in mental health, and and Jenée is about to start working in treatment, and so it's we're going to have places where we might be able to be able to get a room once a month, a safe space for everyone to come together. And it really is mindful evolution. I mean, it's everyone evolving together and connecting. And again, it's totally confidential. Working in the field, we respect confidentiality, and so everybody will be respected. Their privacy will be respected. But I love that idea, and I definitely think that's going to happen. We're going to make it happen.
Yeah.
I'll promote the hell out of that on here.
Yeah,
please.
Yeah, we're going to do it.
After you told your mom and about your story, and that opened up an opportunity to go on stage in front of students.
The first time, yeah.
Students. What was the response from your story? What was the response? What kind of response did you get?
So when this is usually a lot at college campuses, it's more nonverbal. You can kind of just get a feel in the room for who's connecting. I saw a lot of tears. I had a few come up to me and say thank you, and they wanted to talk to me. There was a counselor available if someone felt triggered, which was great. So for me, I didn't have anyone in particular come to me and open up, but I had a lot of nonverbal cues. I could tell the ones who connected. I think survivors just have that spidey sense. So we can tell.
And that led to further opportunities?
It did. I had two other speakers there, and Brian Cardoza, a male survivor, he was there, and we just hit it off, and we connected, and he connected me to other opportunities in Raleigh and Philadelphia. Yeah.
And you just got back from Philadelphia.
I did.
You were there like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it's been almost 2 weeks ago already.
Survivor nights?
Yes, knight in shining armor.
Okay. What'd you do there?
Yeah, talk about that.
Come on.
So, that is perfect because
I saw you like running the steps like Rocky up there in Philly. I saw you having fun.
Yes, definitely. I was so hyped up. I ran the steps like Rocky. There's video footage to prove it. But
that's awesome.
But anyway, so what Survivor Nights is it was created by Brian Cardoza 10 years ago. He's in New Bern, and his friend Michael Broussard kind of helped him with one in Philly, and that started 4 years ago. And it's an art show for survivors with all sorts of trauma to share their story through whatever form. So there was poetry. I shared my mindful evolution project through presentation. I got a lot of wonderful feedback. I networked. There was paintings. There was photography of someone who took pictures of individuals who had scars, like from cutting or any kind of self-harm wound. And they were beautiful. And so it's a place to come together to support one another. And speaking of, I was asked by Brian if I wanted to host a Survivor Night in Asheville. And I said yes. So it's going to look like fall, like November of this year. So please listen, turn up the volume, and if you want to be a part as a survivor, as a supporter, both, please just contact me. Plenty of time to think about it. But I'm excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a part of that.
Yes, definitely. We need a venue.
Yeah.
If anybody's
Absolutely.
listening and they
I
would
just
like,
found Brian on Facebook. I'm already making moves.
if anybody's listening, they would like to reach out to provide a venue or offer a venue.
Yes.
We will be providing all of Emily's information near the end of the podcast. You can find her on Facebook, Mindful Evolution page, all that good stuff. So, now what I want to talk a little bit about is you studied social work and you found yourself working with children.
Yeah.
And prior to all this mindful evolution stuff, right? Is that
Yes. Yeah. I worked in adult mental health and then child mental health.
Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work that you were doing is kind of working with trauma. Mm-hmm. It is?
Yes. I work with a lot of the percentage of the cases we work with, ages 3 to 7, are trauma related.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that like all of that work and like doing that kind of thing, kind of aside from like your experience at school that you kind of talked about a little bit ago, do you think that type of work kind of like opened you up to pursuing this type of creative project and kind of like seeing it in like the little ones, right? And seeing it in the young people, the future of America.
Yeah.
And like kind of like recognizing that this is a serious topic. Like the data shows was it 1 in 3 and 1 in 6. Is that
And
right?
1 in 4.
1 in 4.
Women will be sexually abused before the age of 18. That's another statistic. Yeah.
So like seeing the numbers of young people come through your office and talk to you on a regular basis, kind of contributed to like your thought process of like, I need to do something.
It definitely helped fire it up. Yeah. So when I worked with my adults, it's kind of like I went backwards. So when I worked with my adults, a lot of their clinical assessments showed abuse as children and trauma as children. And that most of them led to addiction or self-harming and, a form of abuse, and so I tried to reach the adults, and I found it harder as they got older to keep them stable and so I kind of got frustrated. When there was an opening in intensive in-home, I immediately applied for the young child team. I used to be a preschool teacher. I have a background in that, and I'm passionate about that age group. So I knew I had the early childhood education piece and the experience, and then I had the piece of as being a survivor. So I just was ready to it, and I got the job based on my experience as a preschool teacher because they knew you could relate, to some of what is going on there in the brain of the young child, and so I kind of my job. It's definitely hard. I have to put that boundary there, because a lot of the cases are pretty severe and it's heartbreaking. And my hope is that when they're older, is that this project will be something they can turn to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My first experiences, traumatic experience, were actually as a child, and then it was suppressed, way, way deep down. And I do believe that is what led to me reaching out to drugs and alcohol as a form to numb or cope with that pain. And then with that came, the loss of boundaries, then the very risky behaviors, and experiencing being homeless and putting myself in a very vulnerable situation. It was all connected, to the abuse I experienced as a child that I never talked about. I didn't even tell my mom until my 20s. She didn't even know. And it's just kind of, for me, it was, once I became an adult, and I I was able to, because I had to grow up too fast because of these experiences. So once I became an adult, it was like I went back to a childlike state. You know, that Peter Pan, never want to grow up syndrome. And, you know, that's what led to these self-destructive behaviors, except I was an adult, so I could drink, I could, you know, participate in these behaviors that were very self-destructive and risky, you know, to the point where it did become as bad as it did, you know. So that's another thing I love about this project, is it gives you a voice before you reach that point, you know. Like, I made it out alive, but some people don't, you know. I mean, there was, you know, the experience that I had, there was rumor on the street that a couple weeks later it happened to another individual with increased brutality. And then a couple weeks later, a girl turned up dead with the same brutality, same MO. And this was all rumors on the streets. I can't confirm whether or not it was true or if it was the same group of individuals or not. We don't know. But the reality is this is real, and it happens to women, you know, to men, you know. And the MO isn't just sexual abuse. It's you know, it's a power control, and sometimes they take their life as well. So it's a very serious matter. Yeah.
And I think it's also important to acknowledge that those individuals who have been affected by secondary trauma, the individuals who have witnessed these experiences
Definitely.
to a loved one, because it's not something that's talked about a lot. You know, when we hear the word trauma, we immediately think about what happened to me and like my story. But we don't necessarily acknowledge, because oftentimes we're suppressing it, like what we saw and like what happened to somebody else, somebody that we love and someone that we care about. Right out of high school, I had a close friend commit suicide because after his girlfriend was sexually assaulted, he carried a lot of blame internally on himself because he wasn't there to protect her. They went out separately and she experienced a sexual assault, and a few days later he killed himself because he carried that blame on his shoulders. And so like the impacts of these severely traumatic experiences go so much further, so much deeper than just the individual that it happened to.
Absolutely.
Just like addiction, that it's a family issue.
Absolutely.
And it's oftentimes generational, you know, like why does this happen? You know, like what, at one point in time, the perpetrator was a child, right? A little baby.
That's right.
Innocent, loving. And something happened in that individual's life that they grew up to a point where they chose to harm somebody in the manner that they did, right? And so like
Hurt people.
hurt people.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so when I think about this stuff, I think about like what steps can we take like as a society to educate and prevent this type of behavior. And like, you know, mass media and the internet and access to porn and all of those things like cultivate unhealthy behaviors.
Right.
Right? Like that.
Or make it okay.
Make it okay. Right. Or like, you know, I mean, and then we hear like with the Me Too stuff, like this stuff has been going on in our society for ever.
Long time.
Ever.
Yeah.
Ever, basically.
And we're just now acknowledging it.
That's right.
Right? And it was okay to act and behave that way.
Right.
20, 30 years ago, the people that were doing those types of things were people that we looked up to. that we like commended and recognized. And like,
Yeah.
like, you mean to tell me that like the people in, I don't want to, like, Bill Cosby's life didn't know, the people around him, a powerful man like that, didn't know that he was doing those things to women?
Right.
And nobody spoke up. Everybody turned a shoulder. Sandusky, Penn State, all that stuff. Like, how did we get to that point?
Right.
How do we get to the point? I mean, we're just now talking about it, and I do believe that it takes time for, takes a significant amount of time for us humans to change our behaviors, societally speaking, to learn. It's like this type of like shift in culture is not something that like we wake up and say, okay, today we're all gonna like change, right?
Absolutely.
Like it takes a long time, like the caveman mentality to like go away. It takes intentional effort, right?
Yeah.
It takes projects like this and people telling their stories in a public forum where it's okay to tell your story,
Right.
Where it's okay to shed a tear and get it out.
That's right.
In that environment where you went, where it's okay. And then somebody listening to this podcast or somebody in the crowd says, you know what? Like, I experienced that too, right? Jenée can go back and take these beautiful pictures, tell this amazing story. I can too. I can go to my mom and talk to her about what happened. And it's hard because like the families need just as much support as the individual that experienced it, because the way that our minds are wired is we automatically want to blame somebody. Anytime something happens, we want to point the finger. It's somebody's fault. Right. We want to look to whose fault it is and place blame on them.
It's our defense mechanism.
Natural defense mechanism. But is that the way that cultivates healing? I don't think so, right? It doesn't, like, to me, it doesn't matter who did it. It matters how we respond to it.
Absolutely.
I agree.
You were talking about this generation of society and how it, it wasn't until I was older that I realized, like, on my mother's side of the family, that mental illness and addiction struggles are prevalent with her brothers and sisters. And, I'm not, she doesn't speak much about her growing up, but I don't think that, I think there was some pain there with her mom, and how it just passed down generation to generation. And I really believe that God is doing a movement in so many different projects and so many different ways of breaking those generational curses. Of just taking back that ground and saying it can stop here. I remember being in the prison of my addiction and wanting so badly to get out and wanting so badly for God to do, to help other people when I couldn't even help myself. And, I remember as a kid, even if my mom didn't talk about her pain, I saw it, in other ways, whether it was projection or whatever it is. I remember, feeling my mom's pain. And I'm sure that my mom felt her pain, and it was passed down. And, my hope is that my children don't have to feel or carry my pain, is that, I can go through this process of healing and they can see, somebody with strength, and then they can grow up to be powerful men that respect women, that can, respect society, and we can start to stop these things. As a whole, it definitely is going to collectively take people coming together and raising their voice, but these, like you said, society has become super hyper-sexed, and a lot of things are
really
okay,
has.
And, even me, like, we love these memes. They're hilarious, right? Super inappropriate. A lot of times, like, You know, I mean, I used to love me some memes, and now I'm like, wow, some of them are pretty savage. And it's humor is a way to cope with things. Absolutely. I am totally on board for that.
There's a healthy way to do it.
But there has come to a point where, like, on social media and on, you know, all these social, like you said, porn so accessible and all this stuff, where it's just become so acceptable for us to disrespect each other, and like that needs to stop. You know, I mean, you know, boundaries are important, and with all of these things so accessible, it's humans have been like, oh, I don't have to have these certain boundaries. You know, I can text this or send that or whatever, and you know, we're not creating those boundaries, which is so important. So,
and I don't know what the answer is, because like it's with the way we choose to use the internet today, societally speaking, with the way we choose to use the internet today, like the ship is almost sailed on this thing. Like there's no turning back, you know, like we, like us collectively here can be leaders and choose to use it as a tool to promote health and wellness and healing and all of those things. But it's going to take like millions of us to do that.
yeah.
Because like you said, it's a push of a button.
To stand
like
up. Yeah.
It's
you know, there seems to be a whole lot of like, you know, a shame or guilt associated with it, or we don't want to hurt people around us. You know what I mean? Like you were talking about with the family members. You know, I have thought about the fact that it must be hard for my family members to hear this experience. When I finally told my mom what happened to me, it was a gift. My mother broke down and cried and apologized. She said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know," and I was given that, and that was a beautiful thing. But I have a relationship with my mother today. We talk on the phone, and I'm telling you, like, something has changed in this woman. I've been praying for it for so many years. And I call her, and she's present for me. And we're able to, like you said, make those amends to each other. And what's so funny is that just happened a few months for me as well. And so making these amends and this source of healing, like, it is such a big part of the process, I believe. You know, like, God's like, you know, I'm not, you know, you got to be ready. You got to be ready. You know what I mean? Like, you have to do this thing. You have to do that thing. And like Stephen was saying, like, I would come to the podcast, but I wasn't ready to share, you know what I mean? Like, he's got to prune us a little bit first, you know, and it's definitely a process. Like, I shared my story at the women's prison this past Monday, and like, I shared my story, and afterwards I was like, whoa. Like, I was like, I hope that, I kind of like, after the meeting, I was like, I hope the women are okay, because it was like, wow, it's so heavy, you know. So it's definitely a process of learning to share each and every time, but we don't learn if we don't get up and say something.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
From a family perspective, like, how do we have this conversation in a way that is compassionate, accepting?
So it's really funny. You've both touched on other parts of the mindful evolution that are in the works. Is both sides of my family are addiction, and alcohol abuse, and and other things, and one side's Irish Catholic and then the other Southern Baptist, and they didn't talk about it. And a lot of my family members struggle with addiction or alcoholism, depression, anxiety, and it's just not talked about. And one of my goals is to stop that, is to talk about it, because I have lost family members before their time, a handful. And if we would have known what was going on, if they would have talked about it or somebody would have listened, maybe they'd still be here. And I'm not the only one. I know that's everybody can connect to that in some way. And I think, like what you said, Jenée, like with your boys, I really think that this generation, that we are going to we are going to change that is because with the Me Too movement, there's so many more people coming out, right?
Yes.
And it's a beautiful thing. And it used to not be that way. It's always been there. There's always been this going on. Since the dawn of time, rape has happened. Since the dawn of time, addiction, like it's always been there. Since we've been given that free will that, we've had that pain. And I don't know why people do it. I have no idea, but hurt people do hurt people. I mean, that's very, very true.
I mean, when you speak about different traumas and you speak about domestic violence, like if I were to honest, I would have to say that there were times when I was the person. For many years, I reenacted things that happened in my childhood. And I was the perpetrator as well. And I struggled with a lot of guilt and shame from that, And there were times when I would have blackouts and I would wake up from a blackout and my significant other would say, "Do you remember doing this to me?" And having a bruise here or a scratch there. And I had to come to terms with the fact that I not only had this done, but I have done this to other people. And God is working on healing that part of me as well. I don't think that every person that has done these things are just terrible people. God came here, sorry, I don't want to get on my soapbox about God, but I mean, he came here for all of us, for all of us. You know what I mean? I have to forgive myself as well as the people that have sexually abused me, and that's still a process. I still have a lot of anger, but God loves those people too. And the thing is stop trying to speak up before these things happen, having prevention measures, having places that people can go to, support groups where they can talk about it, or maybe even having groups to where if someone is I mean, they do have, shelters for domestic violence, something like that, but creating a network that's lived experience, peer support, saying I've experienced this as someone's going through it. What is a way that we can prevent it before these things actually happen, or boundaries being crossed in a relationship or a family member, when you start to go, I don't think that's right or appropriate, having somebody that they can call and be like, is this weird? Can you validate that, that maybe these are unhealthy boundaries or they shouldn't be treating me this way? And having somebody, be able to step in and be a voice and a support, and maybe people will be able to leave those relationships or family situations before a truly traumatic event occurs, before the lines are crossed. This just kind of came to me, so I'm rolling with it.
Come on.
We that to me is a vision for me. Can we step in before this stuff happens? Not of course the services, the support groups for afterwards as well. But what can we do before? What can we do? Like you were saying, to raise awareness on how brash society has become with these issues.
And you hit on something that also doesn't get talked about a lot, in that fact that the perpetrators themselves, obviously committing a crime comes with a punishment for that crime. However, that punishment typically doesn't entail addressing whatever trauma led up to them committing that behavior.
Right.
And so with the way that we communicate via the internet and the way that we have access to all of these things today could potentially contribute to more acts of violence and trauma.
Or what about the people that have said, I have done this and I will do it again?
Yeah.
The people with severe mental illnesses that like you were saying, end up incarcerated for a crime, and they tell the therapist, I am impulsive, I'm going to do this again, and they let them go anyway. Like they are actually speaking up for themselves and in a sense trying to protect society. Like what are we implementing or putting in place to prevent this from happening? In essence, for lack of a better term, why do we keep letting rapists out if they're going to rape again?
Yeah. And what are you doing to address it?
Right. What are we doing to address it? Or the mental illness of if it is a mental illness and that compulsion is there, which I understand, the mental compulsion to get high or to drink. What if it's the same for a sexual deviant? Then what are we doing to help with that, to help them with that compulsion before the acts are committed?
No, I agree, and I have no idea to that. I don't know how to answer that, and I think we need to get down to the root of why people do it.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the root is.
Well, a lot of people that have raped have been raped.
Yes.
Yes, we do know that.
And I would like to ask, do you know the numbers, like how many of reported sexual assaults are substance related?
I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, Steven Tyler, he opened up Janie's house, which is hopefully there's going to be one coming to Asheville area soon. It's a house for girls under age 18 who've been sexually abused. He knows from dealing with addiction himself that I think it's like 95% or 90%, if I'm not mistaken.
A very significant number.
It's a very significant number of people who have been sexually abused, raped, sexually assaulted, who find addiction. And that addiction doesn't have to be drugs or alcohol. It could be eating disorders, it could be cutting, there's lots of types of ways to harm yourself to numb that pain. And so it's a high percentage.
Yeah.
Jenée, you're a mother, right?
I'm a mother.
You're a mother of two beautiful little boys.
Yes.
How do you anticipate talking to your boys about both what happened to you and then also from an educational prevention point of view? I mean, obviously every mother does their best to teach their child what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
But how do you anticipate these conversations going?
I don't know. They're little. I hadn't really thought of that.
The kids are having sex at like 9 and 10 years old.
I know.
12 years old.
I know.
Baby, that's right around the
So
corner.
Grandma Hill is watching this, so she's probably like, "Oh no, you were still a baby." No, but I just, I would imagine just, my hope is that my children will be open with me and asking, and I will be open and answering.
Because we talked about like
questions.
the generational patterns, right?
Absolutely.
And we talked about like, I would agree with the statement that you made earlier that it wasn't something that was talked about in my household. Excessive drinking was the norm.
Right.
It wasn't like, oh, we live in a household of alcoholics. It was just, that was an accepted behavior. We go on vacation, everyone gets shit-faced. Like, that's just what we do.
Right.
We go to the beach, it's a party,
Yeah.
But any type of trauma and things like that was not, I'm an
Not
old timer
discussed.
now, and I don't remember. I did a lot of damage to my brain, but from what I can recall at this moment right now, I don't remember a lot of conversations about that.
That's right.
I don't remember conversations about specifics on like what to do or how to respond to these events.
Right.
And so like, in order for us to kind of break that cycle, it's important for us to have these conversations. Now, obviously, your project is on the internet, so at one point in time, like a memory will pop up. But like, it's important to like and not pointing blame to our parents, like, because it's definitely not our parents' fault. Like, they did their best at that time. They didn't understand the world that we would grow into,
and it's continuing to
change. So, like, you know, I spend a lot of time thinking about, like, how am I gonna talk to my son about drug use? How am I gonna talk to my son about an appropriate way to respect and treat a woman? Because I'm just as guilty as anybody else on like causing harm and being in bad relationships and doing all of those things. So how do I teach my son not to, that the way that dad lived his life at one point is not acceptable, right? How do I have enough courage to be forthcoming and open about the way that I previously treated women?
Well, I think if we're questioning it, we're already on the right track.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if we're already thinking about what we're gonna say, we're, I used to go like to friends and family and be like, how do I know if I'm gonna be a good mother? And they're like, because you're asking about trying to be a good mother. And what came up for me when you were talking was building self-confidence for my children. So, you know, when I had Bradley, I said, has anyone told you that you're amazing? And when we first, Lauren started that through, Richie saying that. Love Richie. But, she started saying that to me. So I started saying that to my son. And at first he would be like, And then he would go, no. And then now when I say, has anyone told you you're amazing? He goes, yes, you.
Aww.
And it's that confidence building, and also, boundaries, So Lauren will come up and hug me in front of the kids, appropriate boundaries, but also appropriate signs of affection to show that we love each other, but it's, appropriate in front of the children. So displaying that as well, so they get to see what it's like for two people who love each other, and just being open and talking about it. And something else that I wanted to touch on, kind of going on a different subject, is a lot of people, well, for me, a lot of people say, well, are you in a same-sex relationship because of your trauma? And something that I want to say is I always kind of had an interest before, and yes, I had childhood trauma, but it was more like I was afraid of the conservative people around me were very conservative, and I didn't really know how to come out, and it was something that I kind of kept secret. So I guess something that I just want to say for myself is that I'm not in this relationship because of my trauma. I'm in this relationship because I fell in love with somebody. And I also want to share that for, the LGBTQ movement, as there are a lot of people that might have that orientation because of trauma, but some of them not. You know what I mean? Like, I know people that have not experienced that trauma that are still gay. So trying to remove that stigma as well, especially in the church. Like, you are gay because you must have experienced this and that. You know what I mean? Like, no, the world needed my boys first, is what I say. So, and it's exactly true. Like, I have tried, to have relationships with men, and I just have my preference, and I love who I love, and the same for several people, So we just want to give a voice to anybody out there.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Boom.
You brought up an interesting topic that I think I would like to talk about, and the fact that going through what each of you women went through had to have affected the way that you engage in any relationship, right? Like,
Absolutely.
Going from what you went through and finding a healthy relationship, that had to be a bit of a process for both of you guys to kind of accept and put yourself out there. So what was that like for each of you? Like, what was the process like, and how did it affect the initial kind of relationship?
So for me, how it affected me is when I was raped, I was 17, and I lost my virginity through my rape. So that was the way I experienced sex, and it messed me up. I didn't really date. I would try, and I would freeze up when it came to the intimacy, and I realized that I would freeze because if anyone's familiar, with trauma, I mean, the muscle memory never forgets. So when you are in a traumatic incident, whether it's a car accident, a rape, domestic violence, an overdose, your muscles remember. So the muscle memory remembers before we do. So I would tense up. So literally I would tense up, and I didn't know why, because I didn't remember. I blocked it out. I repressed it. So my muscles never forgot. So the stomach aches, the headaches, I kept stuffing it down, and I kept getting, more headaches and more stomach issues, and I don't know. It honestly took, this is my first successful, healthy relationship, and I'm almost 32, and that was when I was 29. So it took that long. I had to, I guess, accept what happened to me, open up about it, deal with it. And once I did that, and I was so thankful that God brought into my life a man who understood that, as he trained, and he trained in self-defense and how to shoot. He trained a lot of trauma victims. A lot of the people who he taught, my boyfriend Ryan, who he taught, were rape survivors. So he understood from that platform, from that, not platform, sorry, aspect. And so he understood, and he was patient with me. And I don't know if I'm blabbing, but that's what it was for me, is it took realizing why I was freezing up, dealing with it, and healing, finding a healthy relationship, and what love really was.
Yeah.
It takes a unique person to be understanding and open to that experience, and be willing to kind of walk through it with you.
Absolutely.
In a sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Someone has compassion.
You know anybody like that?
Oh yeah.
Who's that?
Who's that? Miss Lauren.
Uh-huh.
Yes. In the beginning, it was a little rocky for me, because I'll also say that through my, because of my trauma, I also kind of put on this persona that was the definition of myself. I engaged in a lot of, promiscuity. It defined me. It almost it was my way of kind of fighting back my trauma, is now I'm going to engage in these behaviors on my own and be in control. So, to be with someone in a loving sense was an entirely different world for me. And I remember just being like, whoa.
What's wrong?
You know what I mean? Why am I crying? No, but I mean, it really is a beautiful thing, because now that part of my life is far more fulfilling, because I am healing. You know what I mean? And instead of, coming in and almost as baggage, now it's I found healing in it. I have a voice, I'm no longer afraid of it. It doesn't define me. That's something, between me and the person that I love. But it definitely was a process. Absolutely. It was hard at first. You know what I mean? As far as that, because I would have flashbacks of the trauma at first. But I don't know, that's not really something that's a part of that anymore. And maybe, through this project and the healing, I found my voice in that. So, and it's created healing in a lot of aspects. Like some of my anger has dissipated, other behaviors,
how soon into the relationships did you guys like feel comfortable talking about your past experience?
Let's see. It's probably, I would say once we were officially dating, it was probably within that first month. Yeah, because I knew his background, and I don't know, I just knew he would understand.
Yeah. What's the next step on the progression of the international movement that is the Mindful Evolution Project? Like, what do you hope to achieve next? Where are you going with this thing?
Yeah, so right now, like I have like 5 other people who have messaged me through Facebook who want their photos taken. So I'm meeting with them. I have some schedules, to meet with them for coffee to kind of see how they want their photo shoot down, to kind of hear more of their story and have their photo shoot kind of written down of how they want it. And then, take some more pictures and post some more and, continue to work on my website and just kind of just build my numbers is really what I'm trying to work on. Is just to, I heard WLOS is doing segments on rape. And like someone said, you should put your project on there. And I'm like, man, I would love to. Like, how do I get connected? It's just like finding that, that right door that really just, that broadcasts it. So right now it's just building numbers and just taking photos, working with photographers if I'm not taking the photos, and I'm not going to stop putting numbers out there. I'm not going to stop putting pictures, and I plan on posting. I try to post every day and just bring awareness and build numbers. That's where I'm at right now.
And there's going to be different stages of the shoots as well. So there's more photos to come. We're going to do.
Jenee's shoot's not done.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not done. We're never done.
That's right.
We're just getting
She looks
started.
right into the camera.
Right
for that
into the
one.
camera. I'm talking to you and you and you and you and everybody. This is just the beginning of something extremely powerful. But what Emily talked to me about also is we're going to do different stages, right? So we're also going to do photo shoots to represent the freedom, which I'm super excited about. Yes. So the healing process. So you don't the response from the photos on my post was overwhelming. I did not expect so many people to respond to that, in messages or text or anything like that. And some people that have messaged or been able or just met in person in passing that might have seen it and said, I didn't say anything on social media, but I've been through that also. So the movement is already spreading. People are already speaking up. And what I love about this is it is creative photography, and we do want to create support groups and maybe, something to help people that are in crisis before an actual crisis occurs. And it's not just a hashtag Me Too. Like, this is something that is tangible. Like, people can look back at these photos, and be able to hold on to that as part of the healing process. I'm excited for the next stage of photography. I'm excited to be a part of this project. I'm excited for us to keep building our voice, and we're going to keep coming up with these different outlets and venues. We just got to get people on board.
Yes.
More people on board with it.
If somebody may be considering reaching out to you to engage in a conversation and potential photo shoot, number one, where can they see Jenee's photos? Where are these photos posted?
Yeah, so they're I have three places you can look. So we'll start with my website, mindfulevolutionproject.com. Photos are on there of Jenée and a few other people. Mine, Jenée, and Brian and Heather, and I have permission to say those names. You can find them on Instagram on the Mindful Evolution Project. And you can also find them on Facebook's The Mindful. So that one's not that one's just Mindful Evolution Project. And that one was just built. But mainly the website is where you're going to be able to find a lot. And Instagram.
Instagram's where it's at these days. That's how you build an audience, an international audience that you're looking for.
Yes.
I'm gonna keep running with that. Well, listen, guys, you're both an inspiration. I feel privileged to have an opportunity to just get to know you, talk about these stories, talk about ideas on how to prevent this from happening to other people, and how to empower people to share the stories that they have, share the experiences that they've had, to both cultivate some healing for themselves, but also inspire others to share their stories, because that's the only way that, you know, this whole trauma situation will be addressed, is through healing existing trauma and then talking about it to prevent further trauma.
Absolutely. You know, maybe, and I'm just rolling here. What if there were, we need, like, society, we don't really know, like, a lot of us don't know how to be respectable men and women and have those boundaries, you know, and I really think it does start, like, I've learned so much about boundaries just in the past year, in recovery, you know, my relationship and relationships with other people and my kids, and just, like, the word boundaries just keeps coming up, and, like, you know, people who are in recovery, our boundaries have been crossed a lot. You know, we've crossed our own boundaries. You know, we've lowered, you know, our standards a lot. And, you know, we're used to a certain way of behaving and living. And what if we were to challenge that? You know, what if we had classes on how to, you know, for men to be men and women to be women, and how we treat and carry ourselves, so that when we are crossed, you know, paths with somebody that might be a potential perpetrator, you know, that we can stop and say, whoa, the way that person is acting is a little weird. What they're saying to me isn't right. Because, I mean, I had an experience where it started with inappropriate things. And I was like, are they really saying those things? But I questioned that because of my own self-confidence and self-esteem was so crushed because of my previous trauma. So, like, what if we had these implications in place already? You know, and we were taught these kinds of behaviors, or, you know, it started in the home, like with my kids. I want to teach my boys to be respectful boys, you know what I mean? Like, so that they know there are certain things you just don't say to a woman. There are certain ways that you just don't treat a woman, you know, or man, you know, like, if my kids grow up and that's their orientation, I'm fine with that too. But yeah, what can we do to prevent?
Continue to have these conversations.
Definitely.
Spread
drop
awareness.
the mic.
Yes.
Keep talking.
You know, I will say, so here's what I will say for those listening: if you're not ready to get to this step, at least know your local crisis centers, okay, your agencies. You know, Asheville, we have Our Voice, and we have Helpmate. You know, we have Mobile Crisis.
Ooh, can you talk about the Our Voice thing?
Oh, yeah, hold on.
Okay.
Okay,
we're going to talk about
just make sure. It's my list. Just make sure that
I wasn't going to sign off until I asked you if we covered everything. Okay?
Just to make sure you're familiar with those local agencies, because I'm going to tell you, like, telling your story to someone, you can be anonymous, okay? Like, I worked on a crisis line at Helpmate from internship, and, like, it's all protected, but it's so freeing to just call someone and tell them. They're there to support you. They're trained. And that's the first step, is telling someone, even if it's someone on a crisis line. So just remember that, is just, you know, here's the quote I heard in a TED Talk. You know, if silence is a predator's best friend, then we need to break the silence. So
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So Our Voice. So Our Voice is a local rape crisis center in Asheville, and I'm going to be meeting with one of the ladies on the focus group, the anti-human trafficking group. And I'm going to meet with her next week. She's very interested in the project and working together, partnering together. So we're very excited about that.
So more will be revealed.
Yes.
On the next podcast.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Have you thought about starting a podcast?
That would be really cool.
Mindful Evolution podcast?
That would be awesome.
Let's do it all.
Do it all.
Yeah. Looking right at the camera again. Let's do it, guys.
Gaze into their eyes. When I get my recording
Stand
studio,
up, speak up.
when I get my recording
Yes.
studio set up,
That'd be awesome.
I'm working on building a NC Raw network of podcasts.
Nice.
So more
Here
than
we
just
go.
this.
I'm ready.
That'd be awesome.
And so
I'm ready.
We're down.
Already got
I
my
would
mic.
like to extend an invitation to you.
Thank you.
My goal is to have that up and operating by the end of 2019.
Nice.
And I would like to give you, if you would accept,
Yes.
like a weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, whatever works for your schedule. A
Yeah.
little podcast where you can come on and talk about what's happening in the mindful evolution
Yeah, that
That
world.
would be amazing.
Some
That'd
of
be
the
so
stories.
great.
You know, and what if we...
I'm excited.
If we're going on and sharing and there are people that are afraid to speak up where they don't want to comment on the podcast itself, what if we had some kind of messaging system where, where they could contact one of us directly or something, or, the mindful of messaging the mindful evolution page, and just saying, so they can reach out and
Yeah.
speak up and still remain anonymous if they wish to.
I'm gonna continue that conversation off of the air because I do have a friend who has a survivor type forum that's very similar to what you're describing, an anonymous way to communicate.
That's awesome.
Yes.
So
Yeah, we'd love to partner with that.
We'll
Very
talk
good.
off the air as soon as we're done. Thank you, ladies. You guys are wonderful. I thoroughly enjoy talking to you, and
Thank
you
you
guys
so
inspired so many more people than myself. So
Yay.
I'm stoked to call you guys friends.
Mindful
Yes,
Evolution
definitely.
Project.
Yes.
Mindful Evolution.
We out here, though.
MindfulEvolutionProject.com.
Yes.
Yes, mindfulevolutionproject.com, and then there's contact info on there. And it's under construction, so.
Come check it out. Thank you guys for listening to NC Raw. Visit our website at www.ncraw.life and subscribe to the podcast by dropping your email address in the little subscription box. You'll receive exclusive content offers emailed to you every week. As soon as we publish a show, you'll get it in your inbox. Y'all have an awesome night. Thanks for checking us out.
Thank
Bye,
you.
thank you.